Today, we will dive into a wonderful story of love and adventure. Let us step inside the warm and welcoming Gryffindor common room, where a new student will soon arrive. The Gryffindor common room went silent the moment he stepped through the portrait hole. The fire crackled once, then seemed to hold its breath. Every eye turned toward the tall, pale figure framed in the doorway, the Slytherin who didn't belong. Draco Malfoy stood there with his chin lifted a fraction too high, clutching a folded parchment from Professor McGonagall like a shield. His robes were immaculate, but his confidence looked forced, stitched together out of habit and pride. The scar on his left forearm was hidden beneath a sleeve, but Hermione Granger noticed the way his fingers trembled when he gripped the strap of his bag. For a long moment, no one moved. Then someone near the fire whispered, "What's he doing here?" Hermione was the first to stand. She didn't mean to. It was reflex, that stubborn instinct to face a problem rather than skirt around it. "Professor McGonagall sent him," she said firmly, before anyone else could speak. Her voice steadied the air, if only slightly. "It's an official transfer." Ron made a strangled sound. "You're joking." "I wish I were," she muttered under her breath. Draco's grey eyes swept the room, sharp and cold. "Don't bother on my account," he said dryly. "I'll stay out of your way." He started up the staircase, the wrong staircase toward the girls' dormitories, and Hermione, to her horror, found herself stepping forward again. "That's not," she began. He turned, one eyebrow raised, waiting for her correction. "Not what, Granger? My doom? Your worst nightmare? Or are you about to tell me where I'm permitted to sleep now that I've been—" He flicked the parchment disdainfully. "Reassigned for character rehabilitation." The words hit the room like sparks. Someone snickered. Someone else muttered, "He deserves Azkaban, not Gryffindor." Hermione crossed her arms, ignoring the tight coil in her chest. "You're in the 7th-year boys' dormitory. It's down the other stairwell. And for the record, I'm assigned to oversee your transition." Draco blinked. "You? Head girl's duty." She forced a polite smile, brittle as glass. "Try not to make me regret accepting it." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite amusement, not quite disdain. "You already do," he said quietly, brushing past her. Hermione exhaled only when he disappeared upstairs. The room buzzed to life again. Questions, protests. Ron's muttered, "You've got to be kidding." But her mind was elsewhere. McGonagall's words from earlier still rang in her ears. "Miss Granger, Mr. Malfoy's transfer is conditional. I trust you to ensure he follows the rules, and perhaps learns a little about courage." Hermione had agreed out of principle. She told herself that if Hogwarts was to heal, everyone deserved a chance to change. But now, watching the common room bristle with old resentment, she wasn't so sure. Later that evening, she found him sitting alone in the far corner, a book open but unread. The firelight softened his features. He looked younger, uncertain. Nothing like the sneering boy who once called her names in potions class. "Malfoy," she said, trying to sound professional. "We need to review the expectations for your transfer." He didn't look up. "I know the rules, Granger. Don't hex anyone. Don't sneer at the Weasleys. Don't breathe too loudly in the presence of St. Potter." "That's not—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "You're not making this easy." "I wasn't aware you expected me to," he murmured. She studied him for a moment. The shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. "You could at least try," she said softly. That made him glance up. For the first time, his voice lacked its usual sharpness. "Try what? Pretend I belong here? Pretend half of them don't wish I'd died with the rest of the Death Eaters?" "Don't say that," she said sharply, but something in her throat tightened. "You're here because Professor McGonagall believes you can change. Because I—" She stopped herself, too late. "Because people can." He smiled faintly, and it wasn't cruel, just tired. "You really still believe that?" "Yes," she whispered. "Otherwise, what was the point of everything we fought for?" Their eyes held, too long, too heavy, until footsteps broke the moment. Ron appeared at the bottom of the stairs, frowning at the sight of them. "Everything all right here?" he asked, tone cautious. "Fine," Hermione said quickly. "Just explaining a few things." Draco closed the book. "Lesson learned," he said coolly. "Good night, Granger. Weasley." He walked past Ron, heading toward the dormitory, leaving behind the faint scent of cedar and ink. Ron waited until he was gone. "You don't actually trust him, do you?" Hermione hesitated. "No," she said truthfully, "but I think he's trying, and maybe that's enough for now." Ron looked unconvinced. "Just be careful. He's still Malfoy." When she finally went up to her room, the fire had burned low. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the flicker of shadows on the wall. The castle was quiet, but her mind wasn't. Somewhere, behind another door, Draco Malfoy was lying awake too. She could almost feel it. Neither of them wanted to be here. Yet something about the night, the silence, the second chances, made her wonder if this punishment of his was really the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. Hermione found him the next morning at breakfast, or rather, she found the empty space where everyone had left him. The Gryffindor table buzzed with chatter, but around Draco there was a neat, untouched circle of air. No one sat within 2 feet of him. His plate remained empty. His fork traced idle lines against it, like he was counting scratches instead of minutes. She hated how wrong that looked. "Good morning," she said, sliding onto the bench beside him before she could think better of it. The motion drew stares. Ron's spoon froze mid-air. Lavender Brown whispered something behind her hand. Draco didn't even glance up. "I wasn't aware you enjoyed public exile, Granger," he said, voice dry as ash. "Maybe I do," she replied. "Makes breakfast quieter." He looked at her then, finally. His eyes, storm grey and guarded, met hers, and for an instant the din of the hall dimmed. She didn't smile, but she didn't flinch either. "Don't do this out of pity," he murmured. "I'm not." "Then why?" She hesitated. "Because I'm trying to prove to myself that you can change. Because I want to understand why it's so hard for you to even try. Because when you looked at me last night, I saw something break." But she said none of that. "Because we're both stuck with this arrangement," she said instead. "Might as well make it bearable." Something flickered behind his expression, a trace of reluctant respect. Then, very quietly, he said, "You're braver than I remember. And you're less rude than I expected. Give it time." Hermione allowed herself the smallest smile. Around them, the whispers continued. She pretended not to hear. The first week was a test neither of them wanted. Draco moved through Gryffindor Tower like a ghost, silent, watchful, touched by suspicion wherever he went. The portraits gossiped about him. The fat lady refused to open the portrait hole the first 2 times until Hermione intervened. When he walked into class, conversation faltered. When he spoke, people stared. And yet, Hermione noticed things the others didn't. How he lingered after lessons, straightening overturned ink bottles. How he sat in the farthest corner of the library, writing furiously in a notebook he always shut when she came near. How, once, she caught him tracing his fingers over a burn mark on his wrist and quickly hiding it. She didn't ask. Not yet. Their first real confrontation came during patrol. They were assigned to walk the corridors together at night. McGonagall's idea, for mutual accountability. The air in the castle was cold, threaded with draughts and half-heard echoes. Their footsteps on the flagstones sounded too loud. "Do you always breathe this loudly?" Draco muttered. "Do you always complain this much?" He glanced sideways at her, a shadow of the smirk she remembered from years ago playing on his lips. "Only when provoked. Then I'll try harder." For a while, the only sound was the rustle of their cloaks. The moonlight spilled across the corridor in silver ribbons. Hermione's wand light hovered between them, soft and gold. They turned a corner and stopped. Ahead, a tapestry fluttered, though there was no breeze. Then, faintly, laughter. First-year giggles. "Out after curfew," Hermione said, striding forward. Draco caught her arm. "Wait." She froze. His hand, warm, firm, utterly real, closed around her sleeve. The touch lasted less than a heartbeat, but it felt like lightning through her veins. "What?" she whispered. He let go immediately, his expression unreadable. "Let me handle it." She blinked. "You?" He stepped ahead before she could argue, pulling the tapestry aside. 2 trembling first years cowered there. One from Gryffindor, one from Slytherin, clutching a contraband jar of fanged geraniums. 10 points from each of you," Draco said sharply, but there was no malice in it. "And next time you want to trade potions ingredients, do it when half the castle isn't asleep." The children scurried away. Hermione stared after them, stunned. "I didn't think that I could be fair," he finished. "That you'd bother." He shrugged. "I'm not the only one trying to start over." For a long moment, they just stood there, the air thick between them. "You did well," she said finally. He gave her a sidelong glance. "You sound surprised." "I am." Their eyes met again, too long, too steady, until the sound of shifting armor broke the spell. Hermione cleared her throat, moving ahead briskly. Behind her, Draco's voice floated softly. "Careful, Granger. You keep praising me like that, and people will talk." She didn't look back. "Let them." But her pulse refused to calm for the rest of the patrol. Days blurred into weeks. The hostility in Gryffindor Tower softened, if only slightly. Some students even began to speak to Draco, short, cautious exchanges about classwork. He never initiated conversation, but Hermione noticed how he listened. And every night they patrolled together. Sometimes they argued about rules, about fairness, about whether redemption was real. Sometimes they walked in silence that wasn't quite uncomfortable. Once, when the power flickered and the corridor fell dark, Hermione heard his quiet, instinctive, "Are you all right?" before he even thought to say her name. That night, she lay awake longer than she cared to admit. The turning point came unexpectedly. A note appeared on the bulletin board. Gryffindor versus Slytherin. Quidditch scrimmage. All houses welcome. It was meant to rebuild inter-house trust. It did the opposite. Draco, still technically on loan, joined Gryffindor's team at McGonagall's insistence. Seeker again. The idea of a former Slytherin flying in scarlet was scandalous enough to fill the Great Hall with whispers. On the morning of the match, Hermione found him alone in the locker room, staring at his broom. "Nervous?" she asked. He gave a small laugh. "Terrified. Happy now?" "No." She hesitated. "You'll be fine. You were always—" "Good?" he offered, dryly amused. "Say it, Granger. It won't kill you." "You were excellent," she said, surprising even herself. He looked at her for a long second. "Careful. Compliments sound suspiciously like affection." She rolled her eyes. "Just don't fall." "I'll try not to die for your sake." He mounted his broom and shot into the sky, the scarlet robes whipping around him. And for the first time, he looked almost free. Hermione's heart clenched. Half the match blurred. Bludgers, shouting, the dizzy swirl of red and green. Then, near the end, a flash of gold. Draco dived. A blur. Gasps. He caught the snitch and nearly collided with the Slytherin Seeker in the process. When they landed, the crowd erupted. Gryffindors cheered, some grudgingly, others genuinely. Draco stood there, breathing hard, the golden snitch glinting between his fingers. He looked up, straight into Hermione's eyes in the stands. He smiled. Not the smirk she'd always hated, but something real. She felt the world tilt. Later, after the cheers faded and the crowd dispersed, she found him outside the locker room again. "You did it," she said, breathless. He shrugged. "I didn't think they'd cheer." "They did." She paused. "I did." He looked at her, expression unreadable. Then, very quietly, "That's the only one that mattered." The silence between them stretched, heavy, fragile, alive. And for one dizzy, impossible heartbeat, Hermione thought he might reach for her hand. He didn't. But his gaze lingered, long enough that she wondered if maybe, just maybe, something had already begun. The victory didn't change everything. It just made the air heavier between them. Gryffindors still watched Draco warily, but their hostility had dulled into curiosity. Some even congratulated him. Brief, awkward nods in the corridor. And Hermione caught the way he never quite knew how to respond. He didn't bask in it. He looked startled, almost fragile. That night, she found him sitting alone in the empty common room, still wearing his Quidditch robes. The firelight painted him in shades of amber and shadow. He turned at her footsteps, eyes narrowing slightly. "Come to lecture me about modesty. Come to make sure you're not still out flying at midnight." His mouth twitched. "I'm learning restraint. One of Gryffindor's many virtues, isn't it?" "Among others," she said, walking closer. Draco leaned back, gaze drifting to the flames. "Strange, isn't it? I used to hate this place. The colors, the noise, the bloody optimism. Now it's starting to feel less like punishment." Hermione sank into the chair opposite him. "That's a good thing." "Is it? Maybe it means I've gone soft. Or human," she said quietly. He glanced at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. "You always think there's something worth saving in people, don't you?" "Yes." He smiled faintly. "And has that ever not hurt you?" Her breath caught. She didn't answer. The silence between them thickened. The fire popped. His eyes flickered with gold. For a moment, it felt like everything else. The house crests, the war, the years of hatred had burned away, leaving only this fragile, unguarded stillness. Then she stood abruptly, breaking it. "You should sleep. You'll need your strength if you want to survive another day in Gryffindor." He tilted his head. "Are you worried about me, Granger?" "No," she said too quickly. He smiled, slow, infuriating, and real. Liar. Over the next weeks, something unspoken began to pull them together. It wasn't friendship, not exactly, more like a quiet recognition. They argued constantly, but never cruelly. Draco's sarcasm sharpened less. Hermione's defenses loosened more. He started studying beside her in the library, at first by coincidence, then by choice. One evening, when the candles had burned low, she glanced up from her arithmancy notes to find him watching her. His quill hovered mid-air, forgotten. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." "Malfoy." He hesitated. "I was just thinking. You make concentration look exhausting." She rolled her eyes. "And you make it impossible." Their gazes caught again, that same suspended tension she couldn't name. She forced herself to look back at her parchment, but her heart refused to obey. The next night, he was already waiting at their table. Rumors spread faster than owl post. Whispers in corridors, glances at dinner. Granger and Malfoy. The phrase alone was enough to make the walls vibrate. Hermione tried to ignore it, but the whispers followed her like shadows. One afternoon, as they left the library, she heard it. A sharp, mocking voice behind them. "Careful, Malfoy. Get too close and she'll turn you into a Gryffindor permanently." The laughter that followed was cruel, familiar. Theo Knott, standing with two others from Slytherin. Draco stopped. His shoulders stiffened, but he said nothing. Hermione, however, did. "Funny," she said coolly, stepping forward. "I thought Slytherins were supposed to be clever, yet here you are, recycling jokes that weren't even original in second year." Theo's grin faltered. "Defending him, are you? Maybe you've forgotten what he used to be." She met his gaze steadily. "No, but I know what he's trying to be now, which is more than I can say for you." For a moment, the corridor was utterly silent. Then Theo muttered something and stalked off. Hermione turned to Draco. "Are you all right?" His voice was low. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He stared at her, expression unreadable. "You'll ruin your reputation, you know." She smiled faintly. "I think it's already ruined." Something in him cracked then. Not visibly, but she felt it. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not as an opponent, but as something frighteningly close to salvation. The next few days were strange. They avoided talking about what had happened, but the air between them was different, charged, fragile, impossible to ignore. During patrol, they walked closer than before. When their hands brushed by accident, neither of them pulled away immediately. Hermione told herself it was nothing, a product of circumstance, proximity, adrenaline. But every time he spoke, that low, calm voice, that careful sarcasm, something inside her shifted. And Draco, for all his self-control, wasn't immune either. She saw it in the way his gaze lingered when she tucked her hair behind her ear, in how his voice softened when he said her name. One night, it broke. They were walking by the courtyard, the moonlight glinting off the frost. Hermione was shivering. She hadn't brought her cloak. Draco noticed. "You're freezing," he said. "I'm fine." He hesitated, then removed his own cloak and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The gesture was automatic, uncalculated. She looked up at him, startled. Malfoy, don't argue. His voice was quiet, roughened. Just don't. The world went still. The cloak smelled faintly of smoke and rain, and his fingers brushed her arm as he adjusted it. A tiny, wordless touch. Too long, too careful. Her heart stuttered. Why are you doing this? He swallowed. Because for once, I don't want to be the one who walks away. She froze, the words hanging between them like something dangerous. He looked at her, eyes dark, unguarded, every mask gone. Draco, she whispered. He stepped closer, not touching, not quite. The air between them electric. You don't have to say anything. I know it's insane. I know what we are, what we were. But when you look at me like that, her breath caught. When you look at me like that, he continued softly, I forget who I'm supposed to be. Hermione's pulse thundered. She should have stopped him. She should have walked away. But her voice refused to come, and her body refused to move. The moment stretched, fragile, suspended, until the distant chime of the clock shattered it. Midnight. He stepped back immediately, breaking the spell. Good night, Granger. She stood there long after he'd gone, his cloak heavy around her shoulders, her heart heavier still. That night, Hermione couldn't sleep. She replayed every word, every glance, every hesitation. It wasn't supposed to happen. It couldn't. He was Malfoy, the boy who once spat the word mudblood like a curse. And yet, that boy was gone, replaced by someone raw and uncertain, someone who had learned to be gentle. The next morning, she returned his cloak. Neither of them spoke about what had happened, but the silence between them had changed. They didn't need to name it. It was already there, alive, dangerous, and inevitable. Rain had settled over the castle, turning the air heavy with the scent of wet stone and wood smoke. The sky pressed low against the towers, the color of spilled ink, and the corridors seemed narrower, quieter, as if Hogwarts itself was listening. Hermione spent the morning pretending nothing had changed. She threw herself into coursework, sat with Ginny and Neville at lunch, and kept her gaze anywhere but the far end of the table where Draco sat alone. It didn't help. Every flicker of white blonde hair in her periphery tugged her attention back to him. Every heartbeat was an argument she couldn't win. When she left the Great Hall, she caught him watching her. Just a glance, quick, uncertain, but it stayed with her like static. By evening, she was pacing the library aisles, restless. The rain drummed steadily against the windows, filling the silence between the shelves. She almost convinced herself she was alone until a familiar voice broke through. You're stalking the arithmancy section again, Draco said, appearing between the shelves. Should I be worried or impressed? Hermione spun around, startled. He stood there, damp from the rain, hair falling messily over his forehead. His usual polish was gone. He looked human in a way she wasn't ready for. What are you doing here? She asked, trying for composure. McGonagall's essay, he said, holding up a roll of parchment. Though I suspect my company wasn't in your study plan. It wasn't, she said, but her tone betrayed her. He smiled faintly. And yet, here we are. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence. Then she said, quietly, about the other night. Don't. His voice was low, strained. Hermione hesitated. You said you didn't want to walk away. He looked down, jaw tight. And I meant it. But it doesn't matter what I want. It matters to me, she said before she could stop herself. He exhaled, a sound halfway between a sigh and a laugh. You shouldn't say things like that, Granger. It makes it harder to keep pretending this is a terrible idea. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's the worst one we've ever had. Their eyes met again, that unbearable magnetic pull between defiance and longing. Neither moved. The world outside could have vanished, and she wouldn't have noticed. Then he stepped closer. Just one step. Enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him, the scent of rain and parchment. His voice dropped. If I touch you now, everything changes. Her heart stumbled. Then don't. He didn't move. Neither did she. The silence stretched, the space between one breath and the next. Then, almost imperceptibly, he reached out, fingers brushing a damp curl from her temple. The touch was feather-light, reverent, gone too soon. Hermione's breath caught. Draco! He stepped back sharply, like the moment had burned him. We can't. Not here. Not now. She opened her mouth to argue, but he was already walking away. When the door shut behind him, the rain sounded louder than before. For days afterward, they avoided each other. Hermione buried herself in work, but her thoughts refused to stay where they belonged. She caught glimpses of him in class, the curve of his wrist as he wrote, the shadow beneath his eyes, and every time her chest tightened. During patrols, they spoke only when necessary. The air between them buzzed with unspoken things, until, inevitably, the tension cracked. It happened late one night, after curfew, when they found a group of second years sneaking into the kitchens. Hermione scolded them sharply. Draco leaned against the wall, watching. When the students left, she turned on him, irritated. Are you going to help, or just stand there looking smug? I was admiring your technique, he said. You're terrifying, Granger. No wonder the war ended early. Her temper flared. You think this is funny? Not at all. His tone softened. I think you're magnificent when you're angry. She froze. The word magnificent lodged in her chest like a spark. Don't, she whispered. Don't what? Say things you don't mean. He pushed off the wall, stepping closer. Who says I don't? Because it's easier, she said bitterly. You flirt to deflect. You joke so you don't have to feel. He stopped inches from her. And you analyze everything so you don't have to admit you want something. The words landed like a spell. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. His voice dropped lower. Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll stop. She couldn't. He reached up, fingers trembling slightly, and brushed his thumb against her chin, forcing her to look at him. The corridor was dark, except for her wand light, casting gold over his face. And for the first time, he looked vulnerable, almost frightened. This is dangerous, she whispered. I know. You'll regret it. I already do. And then his lips were on hers. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, clumsy, real. Every unspoken word, every denied emotion poured into that kiss. Hermione's world narrowed to the warmth of his mouth, the pressure of his hand against her back, the impossible thud of her own heartbeat. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Hermione stared at him, her thoughts spinning. This can't. I know, he said, voice hoarse. But it did. She stepped back, shaking her head. We can't let anyone find out. He gave a faint, humorless laugh. Believe me, that's the last thing I want. Something sharp flickered in his eyes. Fear, self-loathing, maybe both. Then he said, quietly, I shouldn't have done that. Her chest ached. No, you shouldn't have. But I didn't stop you. He looked at her like he was memorizing her face. That's what terrifies me. Before she could answer, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. The next morning, Hermione woke feeling like she'd been hexed. Her reflection looked the same, but everything beneath her skin felt wrong. Too alive, too aware. She avoided him all day, skipped breakfast, took the long way to class, refused to look up when he entered the room. But when his hand brushed hers, passing a parchment during potions, the contact sent a jolt straight through her. By evening, she'd stopped pretending she could think about anything else. She found him again in the common room, alone. The rain hadn't stopped. He was staring into the fire, sleeves rolled, shadows under his eyes. He didn't look up when she approached. "You're avoiding me," he said quietly. "Yes." "Because of last night?" "Yes." "Do you regret it?" Hermione hesitated. Her heart answered before her mind did. "No." He turned then, slowly. His expression was unreadable. "Then what are we doing?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But if we keep pretending it's nothing, it'll destroy both of us." He gave a small, sad smile. "And if we admit it, then it destroys something else." They stared at each other across the firelight. Two people standing on the edge of a precipice neither had meant to find. Finally, he rose, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but his voice was steady now. "Maybe it's worth breaking for." The words hit harder than a spell. She wanted to argue, to retreat, to make it logical. But reason had stopped working the moment his hand brushed her skin. The flames threw their shadows against the wall, long and tangled, as if the castle itself had already chosen sides. Hermione swallowed hard. "Then we're already falling, aren't we?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. The next week unfolded like a secret no one dared to name. Between them, everything looked the same to the outside world. Careful, distant, professional. But underneath, something had shifted beyond repair. A glance now held a story. A silence hummed like a confession. Hermione caught herself memorizing details she had no business noticing. The way his voice softened when he spoke her name, the tiny scar near his jaw, the way his hand always flexed once before he reached for his quill, as if fighting the instinct to reach for her instead. And Draco. He watched her too closely now. His sarcasm was still there, but the bite was gone, replaced by something gentler, something dangerous. On patrol, the rhythm of their steps had changed. They no longer walked side by side out of duty, but out of quiet habit. Words had become scarce, replaced by stolen glances and the occasional brush of a sleeve that neither of them corrected. One night, when the wind howled through the stone corridors, Hermione broke first. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "if people can really start over?" He stopped walking. "Every day. And," he looked at her, his face half shadow, "so far, I'm failing at it spectacularly." "You're trying," she said, surprising herself with the tenderness in her tone. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Trying doesn't erase what I did." "No," she whispered, "but it's a place to begin." Something flickered in his eyes, a fragile hope wrapped in disbelief. "Why do you keep doing that?" "Doing what?" "Seeing something in me that no one else does." She hesitated, then said, "Because I know what it's like to be hated for what you are." The words hung between them, heavy and raw. Draco's breath caught. Slowly, he reached out and brushed his fingertips against her wrist. A fleeting touch, hesitant and trembling. She didn't pull away. The sound of their heartbeats seemed to fill the corridor. Then, as if realizing the danger of what he'd done, Draco dropped his hand and stepped back. "Good night, Granger," he murmured. "Good night," she replied, though her pulse kept racing long after he was gone. The next morning, the castle was buzzing with rumors again. Someone had seen them together after curfew. Someone else claimed Draco had hexed a Ravenclaw who insulted Hermione. None of it was true, but truth hardly mattered at Hogwarts. Gossip was a living thing, impossible to kill. Hermione tried to ignore it, but by lunchtime the whispers were knives. "Guess the war changed her taste in heroes," someone muttered as she passed. Draco heard it too. His face went white, then flushed red with fury. Before she could stop him, he was on his feet, ready to retaliate. "Don't," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "It'll only make it worse." He looked at her, jaw clenched. "You shouldn't have to listen to that. I can handle it." "I know you can," he said, voice low. "But you shouldn't have to." She didn't know what to say to that. For once, his anger wasn't arrogance. It was protection. Later, when the great hall had emptied, they stayed behind. The candles burned low, throwing warm light over the long tables. "You shouldn't defend me," Hermione said quietly. "It makes people talk." He gave a half smile. They already talk. Might as well give them something worth whispering about. She shot him a look, but it faltered when she saw the way he was watching her, like he was memorizing her again. "Draco." He stepped closer. "You said my name." "I've said it before." "Not like that." Her throat went dry. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" He was too close now. The heat from the candles mixed with the chill of the stone floor, and she felt dizzy from the contrast. "People will see us," she whispered. "They already have." His voice softened. "But they don't see this." "Then stop before I do something foolish." "Too late," he said, barely audible. Hermione's breath hitched. Her rational mind screamed for distance, but her heart, traitorous and alive, reached for him instead. Their fingers brushed just once, enough to make her forget the rest of the world. And then the doors creaked open. Harry's voice echoed through the hall. "Hermione, you left your bag in." He stopped mid-sentence. Hermione jumped back, blood roaring in her ears. Draco straightened instantly, the picture of indifference. Harry's eyes flicked between them. His expression hardened. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Hermione said too quickly. Draco's tone was smooth, almost bored. "Relax, Potter. We're not plotting world domination, just revising." Harry's gaze stayed on Hermione. "You don't have to explain anything to him," she said sharply. But Draco's jaw tightened. "No, she doesn't," he agreed, voice colder now. "She never does." He brushed past them and left the hall. Harry turned to her. "Hermione!" "Don't," she said, gathering her things. "Just don't." She left before he could say another word. It took her 2 days to find Draco again. He'd skipped meals, skipped class. When she finally cornered him in the astronomy tower, he was leaning against the railing, staring at the storm clouds gathering over the lake. "You're avoiding me," she said. "Potter looked ready to hex me into next week. Can't say I blame him." "He doesn't understand." "No," Draco said quietly. "He understands perfectly. You deserve someone better than a project. You're not a project." "Then what am I, Granger?" She stepped closer. "Someone who's trying to be better. Someone who's—" She stopped herself, but it was too late. The word hung there, trembling between them. Someone who's what? He pressed. Someone I care about. Draco froze. Say that again. She didn't. She couldn't. He turned to face her fully. You have no idea what that does to me. Then tell me, she said softly. His breath hitched. It makes me want to be someone worthy of it. The words undid her. Slowly, she reached out, fingers brushing his sleeve. He didn't move away this time. The wind rose around them, cold and alive, but the space between them burned. This will ruin us, she whispered. He smiled faintly. Then let it. When he kissed her, it wasn't desperate this time. It was steady, deliberate, a promise wrapped in defiance. The kind of kiss that said, I know this can't last, but I want it anyway. When they finally pulled apart, Hermione's eyes shimmered. What now? She asked. Draco looked out over the dark lake. Now we survive the fallout. The rain began to fall again, soft and relentless, and she realized he was right. Nothing about this would be easy. But when he took her hand, fingers intertwining with hers, she didn't pull away. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about the war or the houses or what anyone might say. She was thinking only of him, the boy who had fallen from grace and somehow found courage in the last place either of them expected. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The days after the kiss felt like walking a tightrope between worlds. In the daylight, they were careful, polite nods in corridors, the illusion of distance. At night, when the castle slept, the rules blurred. They found themselves drawn to quiet corners, to stolen moments that balanced between danger and relief. Every time Hermione told herself she should stop, she found another reason she couldn't. The way his hand brushed hers when he passed her parchment. The way he said her name now, softer, reverent, as though it was something sacred he wasn't meant to touch, but couldn't resist. One evening, during patrol, she caught him waiting for her at the top of the staircase, wand light painting gold across his face. You're late, he said quietly. I had to meet with McGonagall. About me? She hesitated. She's pleased. You've adjusted well. Draco smirked faintly, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. Adjusted. Like a broken wand that still sparks occasionally. Don't say that, Hermione murmured. You're not broken. He looked at her for a long time, something unreadable passing behind his gaze. You'd be the only one who thinks so. Then maybe they're wrong. A silence followed, the kind that hummed with all the words neither of them dared to say. He stepped closer until she could feel his breath against her cheek. You shouldn't look at me like that, he whispered. How am I looking at you? Like you've already decided I'm worth saving. Hermione's voice barely held. Maybe I have. He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. But he only said, You're going to be the end of me. The next day brought the annual Gryffindor study meeting in the library, a chaos of books, ink, and laughter. Hermione arrived late, weighed down by an armful of scrolls. The noise died the instant she stepped in, and Draco followed a moment later, his presence turning every head. What's he doing here? Seamus asked. He's invited, Hermione said evenly. He's Slytherin, another voice hissed. Temporarily not, Draco muttered, dropping into the chair beside her. The tension was sharp enough to taste. Hermione forced herself to focus on the notes, ignoring the whispered objections. When she glanced up, Draco was staring at the parchment, jaw tight. Maybe this was a mistake, he murmured. No, she said firmly under her breath. Stay. She reached for a quill and her hand brushed his. The contact was brief, accidental, but every conversation in the room stopped dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Of course, Seamus muttered. Makes sense now. Hermione's heart plummeted. It's not... But the looks said enough. Suspicion, disbelief, betrayal. Draco rose abruptly. I'll save you the trouble, Granger. His tone was cold, brittle. Enjoy your study session. Draco. But he was already gone. She found him hours later in the courtyard, rain falling in thin, shimmering sheets. He stood beneath the archway, head bowed, cloak darkened by water. You shouldn't have followed me, he said without turning. You shouldn't have walked away. I told you this would happen. His voice was rough. You can't fix what people refuse to forget. You think I care what they think? You should. He turned then, eyes pale and furious. Because you have everything to lose. I have nothing left. That's not true. He stepped closer, water dripping from his hair, his anger and hurt tangled in every word. You don't understand, Hermione. You can stand in the light and still be forgiven. I stand next to you, and the world remembers every sin I've ever committed. She met his gaze, rain clinging to her lashes. Then let them remember. They can't take away who you're trying to become. He shook his head. You don't know how much it costs me just to breathe in this castle. Then stop paying for it alone. He froze. Hermione stepped forward, close enough that her soaked robes brushed his. You don't get to decide what I risk. I'm not afraid of standing beside you. He stared at her, stunned, as if no one had ever said those words to him. Slowly, the fury drained from his face, leaving only exhaustion and something softer. You're impossible, he said hoarsely. So, I've been told. He laughed then, a broken sound that melted into something real. And in that laugh, in that fragile, trembling moment, the tension snapped again. He reached for her, not like before, not with hesitation, but with the surety of someone who finally stopped running. Their kiss was slower this time, deepened by everything they'd tried to bury. The rain fell harder, the world dimmed, but neither of them cared. His hands framed her face, hers curled in his soaked cloak. When they broke apart, breathless, the space between them hummed with everything they couldn't say aloud. This is madness, Hermione whispered. Probably. He brushed a raindrop from her cheek. But it's the first thing that's made sense in years. By the next morning, the castle was buzzing again. Gryffindors were whispering in corners. Slytherins sneered with fresh purpose. Yet, despite the stares, Hermione didn't shrink from them this time. She walked to class, head high. Draco, though, avoided her gaze. His steps were measured, his walls rebuilt. During Transfiguration, he sat 2 desks away. During dinner, he left early. That evening, she intercepted him outside the Great Hall. Why are you doing this? She demanded. He didn't stop walking. Because this isn't your fight. It became mine the moment I kissed you. He halted, turning slowly. The corridor was empty, the torches low. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. No, she said. Do you? His silence said everything. Finally, he whispered, You don't know what it's like to wake up every morning wondering if people wish you hadn't survived. Her voice softened. Then let me remind you why you should have. He looked at her for a long time, then said almost pleadingly, Don't make promises you can't keep. Then don't run before I can try. Draco exhaled sharply, every muscle in his body trembling with conflict. Then, in a rare crack of honesty, he said, I don't know how to deserve you. Hermione reached out, brushing her fingers against his sleeve. Maybe you don't have to. Maybe you just have to want to. For a heartbeat, his mask slipped, and she saw it. The boy behind the pride, the fear, the endless guilt. He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, as though it was something fragile that might vanish. I wish things were different, he murmured. So do I, she whispered. But wishing won't change the world. Doing will. And for the first time, he nodded. When they parted that night, the tension between them wasn't despair. It was resolve. They both knew the cost of what they'd started, but neither was willing to turn back. Hermione returned to her dormitory, her heart a storm of confusion and fierce hope. She knew what people would say, that she'd lost her mind, her standards, her sense of loyalty. But as she sat by the window, watching lightning crawl across the sky, she realized none of that mattered. What mattered was that Draco Malfoy, the boy who once embodied everything she fought against, had looked at her not with scorn or superiority, but with something dangerously close to love. And for all her logic and rules, Hermione Granger knew she would fight for that, even if it broke her. Down in the common room, somewhere beneath the same roof, Draco sat alone by the fire, staring into the flames that refused to warm him. His thoughts were a war he couldn't win, the ghosts of the past against the fragile pulse of something new. And though he wouldn't admit it yet, every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in the rain, the only person who hadn't looked away. That image, that impossible warmth, was enough to make him believe, if only for a moment, that maybe he hadn't been transferred to Gryffindor for punishment at all. Maybe fate had sent him there to learn how to love. Winter came early that year. Frost covered the windows of the castle, catching the morning light like 1,000 tiny spells frozen mid-air. The great hall glittered with icicles, the air heavy with the scent of pine and smoke. To everyone else, Hogwarts felt alive again. But to Hermione, everything had narrowed to a quiet, dangerous rhythm, the beat of her heart whenever Draco was near. They hadn't spoken much since that night in the courtyard. He'd withdrawn again, keeping his words clipped, his glances brief. And yet, something had changed. The air between them was charged, alive, as though every silence held the echo of their last kiss. Hermione told herself it was for the best. She needed to focus on her studies, on rebuilding what the war had broken. Falling for Draco Malfoy had never been part of her plan. But plans meant nothing when the smallest glance could unravel her resolve. The first snowfall arrived during Transfiguration. White flakes drifted past the high windows, soft and silent. McGonagall's voice echoed through the classroom, but Hermione's focus faltered when Draco turned slightly in his seat. For a heartbeat, his eyes met hers. It wasn't defiance or mockery this time. It was a question, and it made her chest ache. After class, she lingered near the door until he caught up. "Walk with me," she said. He hesitated. People will talk. They already do. That earned her a faint smirk, the first in days. He followed her through the courtyard, where snow gathered on their cloaks. The air was cold enough to sting, but Hermione barely noticed. "I didn't thank you," she began. "For what?" "For staying, after everything." He shrugged. "Didn't know I had much of a choice." "You did. she said softly. You could have left. You could have given up. He looked away, his breath a pale cloud in the air. I tried to. Plenty of times. She stopped walking. What stopped you? He glanced at her, and there it was again. That look that made everything inside her tilt. You did. The words were quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the winter air. Hermione's breath hitched. Draco. Don't, he said quickly, though his voice shook. Don't try to make it noble. It's not. I'm not. You're wrong, she said simply, and I think you hate yourself too much to see it. For a moment, he looked as if he might argue. Then he just sighed and said, You make it sound easy. It isn't, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth trying. Their eyes met again, and for a moment the world outside disappeared. No houses, no whispers, no past. Just the snow falling softly around them, and the strange, fragile warmth growing between two people who shouldn't have found each other at all. Then someone cleared their throat behind them. Ron. He stood at the archway, jaw tight, expression unreadable. McGonagall's looking for you, Hermione. Hermione blinked, trying to steady her voice. All right, I'll go in a minute. Ron's eyes flicked to Draco, then back to her. Make it quick, he muttered, and left without another word. The silence that followed was sharp. Draco looked at her, shoulders tense. He knows. Maybe, she admitted. He exhaled slowly. This is going to end badly, isn't it? Probably, she said, but not today. He gave a quiet, broken laugh. You really are a Gryffindor. Someone has to be brave enough for both of us. This time, he didn't argue. As the days passed, their secret became harder to keep. Every look felt like a confession. Every near touch, a promise they couldn't fulfill. The risk only made it worse. They met in hidden corners now, an unused classroom behind the charms corridor, a narrow staircase that led to the old astronomy passage. The meetings were never long, never planned, but always necessary. One evening, Hermione found him already waiting, sitting on the edge of a dusty desk, hands clasped. The faint light from her wand traced the sharp lines of his face, softened by the hint of exhaustion in his eyes. You shouldn't keep coming, he said quietly. I can't seem to stop. He gave a tired smile. You'll get yourself hurt. Maybe. She stepped closer. But so will you, and I'd rather we do it together. He stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, You terrify me. Good, she said. You terrify me too. He laughed, a low, disbelieving sound, and reached for her hand. The touch was light, hesitant, but when she didn't pull away, his fingers tightened around hers. I don't deserve this, he said softly. Maybe not, she admitted, but you deserve a chance. That was all it took. He kissed her again, slower than before, the kind of kiss that made the rest of the world irrelevant. When they parted, Hermione rested her forehead against his. Tell me this isn't wrong, she whispered. I can't, he murmured, but I can tell you, it feels like the first right thing I've ever done. It was almost the Christmas holidays when the truth finally caught up to them. Rumors had grown into certainty. Whispers turned to accusations. By the time Hermione entered the Great Hall that evening, the stairs were open, unforgiving. Ginny caught her arm, her expression tight. They're saying you and Malfoy. I know what they're saying. Is it true? Hermione hesitated. Yes. Ginny exhaled, somewhere between disbelief and reluctant admiration. You're either brilliant or mad. Maybe both. At the Slytherin table, Draco sat alone again, shoulders straight, gaze fixed on his untouched plate. The usual sneers from his housemates seemed sharper now, but he didn't react. Hermione wanted to go to him, to make a statement that would silence them all. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not like this. Instead, she rose and left the hall, her pulse pounding. That night, she found him on the astronomy tower, his favorite refuge from the noise. The stars burned cold above them, the snow reflecting their light. "I heard," he said without turning. "You didn't deny it." "No," he smiled faintly. "You're braver than I am." She stepped closer. "You're braver than you think." He looked at her then, the wind tugging at his hair. "Do you ever regret it?" "No," she said. "Do you?" He shook his head. "Only that I didn't know it could feel like this. Something good that hurts." Hermione reached out, her gloved hand finding his. The contact was simple, but it felt like defiance. "They'll never understand," he said quietly. "They don't have to." He turned to face her fully, eyes soft in the starlight. "And when they try to tear it apart, then we hold on harder." Draco stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, "You really believe in us?" "I do." He leaned down then, his voice a breath against her skin. "Then I'll try to be someone worth believing in." When he kissed her, the stars seemed to shift. Not brighter, but nearer, like the world itself had decided to give them a little more time before it all came undone. For now, it was enough. The snow fell quietly around them, covering the tower in white. Below, the castle slept, unaware that two people, once divided by everything, were learning to rewrite what love meant. Not comfort, not safety, but the courage to choose each other again and again, no matter the cost. By the time Christmas approached, the castle had softened under a blanket of snow. Evergreen garlands hung from the banisters, golden light shimmered from floating candles, and every corridor smelled faintly of cinnamon and wax. Yet beneath all that warmth, the tension between Hermione and Draco burned quietly, fragile and alive. Most students were leaving for the holidays. Hermione had planned to stay. She wanted peace, time to study, space to think. When she found Draco in the courtyard one morning, she realized he'd made the same decision. He stood near the fountain, snow in his hair, a scarf looped loosely around his throat. "You're not going home either," she said. "Home isn't much of a home anymore." The words were simple, but heavy. She didn't ask for details. She knew enough of the shadows he carried. "I'll be in the library," she said instead. "McGonagall wants me to help catalogue the old books during the break. You could—" He smiled faintly. "Join you?" She shrugged. "If you can stand the silence." "I've learned to like silence," he said. "It doesn't judge." The holidays began, and with the castle nearly empty, the quiet was intoxicating. They fell into an easy rhythm. Breakfast together in the near-deserted Great Hall, long afternoons at the library, shared glances that said more than words could. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when he retreated behind old habits, when sarcasm became his armor again. But Hermione had learned to see through it. She saw the tremor in his hands when he touched certain books, the way his eyes softened when she laughed without thinking. One afternoon, while sorting through a pile of old manuscripts, Draco reached for a dusty volume at the same moment she did. Their hands collided, parchment scattering everywhere. "Brilliant," Hermione muttered, kneeling to gather the fallen pages. Draco crouched beside her, his fingers brushing hers as he helped. "You always have to fix things, don't you? It's a bad habit. It's It's why you'll save the world one day." She froze. "And you?" He hesitated, then said softly, "I'll just try not to ruin it again." The words stung. Not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. Hermione looked at him then. Really looked. The boy who had been raised to believe in superiority, now trying to rebuild himself from the ruins of it. "You won't," she said. "Not if you keep choosing differently." He smiled, but it was small, sad. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said, and placed her hand over his. "But you're doing it." The silence stretched, warm and full. Then, slowly, he turned his hand to lace his fingers through hers. Christmas Eve came with soft snow and quiet laughter. The great hall glittered with enchanted frost. The few remaining students gathered near the fire. Hermione and Draco sat apart from the rest, in the shadow of the great tree. "McGonagall tried to give me a Weasley jumper," Draco said, smirking. Hermione smiled. "That's a high honor. It's red." "Of course it's red." He shook his head. "I can't tell if it's penance or punishment. Maybe both." "Do you think they'll ever stop hating me?" he asked suddenly. Hermione looked at him. "No, but that's their problem, not yours." Draco's gaze lingered on her face, his voice quieter now. "You really believe that?" "I have to." He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned closer, so near she could see the faint reflection of the fire in his eyes. "Sometimes I wish I'd met you before the war," he said softly. She smiled, though her heart ached. "You wouldn't have liked me." "I already didn't," he said, his mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And that was the problem. I didn't like anyone who made me question myself. And now I can't stop." She laughed quietly, the sound half joy, half heartbreak. "That's a dangerous confession, Malfoy." "I'm getting used to danger." And then he kissed her, slow, unhurried, like he finally had permission to want something without shame. The music from the far end of the hall blurred into nothing. His hand slid to the back of her neck, tentative but sure, and for a moment the entire world was red and gold and alive. When they pulled apart, Hermione's cheeks were flushed. "Someone could have seen us," she whispered. "Let them," he said, smiling for real this time. She shook her head, laughing under her breath. "You're insufferable." "True, but you're still here." The next morning, Christmas dawned soft and silver. Hermione woke to find a small package at the foot of her bed. Inside was a quill, black as midnight, carved with tiny runes along the stem. A note in careful handwriting lay beneath it. "For the one person who still believes I can rewrite my story. DM." She read it 3 times before pressing the parchment to her chest. Later that day, she found him in the courtyard again, leaning against the railing, watching the snow. "I told you not to get me anything," she said. "I didn't. I made it." She blinked. "You carved that?" He nodded, looking almost embarrassed. "Figured I owed you something that wasn't an apology." Hermione smiled. "I like it better than any apology." "Good," he said, "because I'm running out of those." They stood there in silence, watching the snow fall, the world bright and still. "You know," Hermione said after a while, "when I was little, I used to think snow could erase things, like a clean slate." Draco looked at her. "And now?" "Now, I think it just covers them long enough to make you believe in second chances." He reached out, brushing a flake from her hair. "Then maybe that's enough." Hermione turned to him, her heart tight. What happens when everyone comes back? When this, she gestured between them, has to exist in daylight. He hesitated. We'll face it. Together. She wanted to believe him. Maybe she did. But deep down, she knew the peace of the holidays couldn't last forever. The train would return. The hallways would fill again with laughter and judgment and noise. And the secret that had been safe in the hush of winter would have to survive the storm of spring. For now, though, as snow drifted gently around them and his fingers found hers again, Hermione let herself stop thinking. She leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his coat, the steady rhythm of his breath, the quiet certainty that, for all its danger and doubt, this was something real. Love, she thought, wasn't about comfort. It was about courage, about choosing the fire even when it could burn. And as the bells of Hogwarts rang softly across the white hills, Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy stood together under the falling snow. Two people who had spent years on opposite sides of everything, now learning that redemption, like love, began not with forgiveness, but with a choice. When the students returned after the holidays, the peace of the castle shattered like thin ice. The great hall filled with laughter and footsteps, owls swooped low with letters, and the echo of hundreds of voices rushed back into the corridors. Hermione felt the noise like pressure in her chest. Every word, every glance, every whisper, a reminder that the quiet she and Draco had built was already vanishing. He seemed to feel it too. The first morning back, he avoided her eyes across the table. His posture was rigid, his voice flat when McGonagall greeted him. The familiar masks had returned. Hermione tried not to let it sting, but it did. The sharp ache of something fragile being folded away before it could break. They didn't speak again until 3 days later, during patrol. The corridors were full of late-night chatter. A group of second years slipped away giggling as Hermione rounded the corner. Draco was waiting by the staircase, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "Trying to survive." She studied his face. "That's not survival. That's retreat." "Sometimes they're the same thing." "Not for you," she said softly. "Not anymore." He looked at her for a long time, then said, "You make everything sound like a battle worth fighting." "Isn't it?" He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. "You'll get tired of fighting for me, Granger." "I'll tell you when I do." They started walking again. The halls were dim, the torches flickering with every gust of wind. Their footsteps echoed, a rhythm neither spoke over. At the end of the corridor, she stopped suddenly. "I don't care if they talk," she said, "but I won't be another secret you hide." He flinched, as if struck. "You think that's what this is?" "I think you're scared of what it means if people see us." "Of course I'm scared," he snapped. "You think I don't know what they'll say? What they'll do? Every house, every corridor, every student. They'll make you pay for being seen with me. They already hate me. I can live with that. I won't let them turn on you. I decide what I can handle." Draco's jaw clenched. "You shouldn't have to." Hermione's anger softened. "You keep trying to protect me from the world, Draco, but I'm not asking you to shield me. I'm asking you to stand beside me." He went still. His breath clouded in the cold air. "You don't understand what that means," he said finally. "Being beside me has never been safe." "Neither has loving you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could catch them. He froze. The silence that followed was sharp enough to break. What did you just say? Hermione's pulse thundered in her ears. You heard me. He stared at her, really stared, and she saw everything flicker across his face. Disbelief, fear, something dangerously close to hope. You shouldn't, he said finally. You shouldn't love me. Too late. He took a slow step forward. You don't know what that word means for me. Then teach me, she said. The torchlight flickered, throwing shadows across his features. If I touch you right now, I won't stop. Then don't stop, she said, breath trembling. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he closed the distance. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was raw, desperate, full of everything they'd both tried to deny. His hands found her face, hers curled into his cloak. The world outside the corridor disappeared. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I told myself this would destroy us, he said, voice hoarse. Maybe it will, Hermione whispered. But right now, it's the only thing that feels real. The days that followed blurred into a fragile kind of equilibrium. Hidden moments between chaos, small glances that held the weight of everything unspoken. They never talked about what had happened in the corridor. They didn't need to. Still, the rumors grew. Gryffindors whispered when she entered the room. Slytherins smirked when he walked past. Even the portraits seemed to watch with wary curiosity. One afternoon, after class, Hermione found Ginny waiting by the library door. Is it true? Ginny asked quietly. You and Malfoy? Hermione hesitated, then nodded. Ginny exhaled slowly. I won't tell anyone. But Hermione, be careful. The war might be over, but not everyone knows how to let it end. I know, Hermione said. Do you? Ginny's voice softened. Because loving him, it's not wrong, but it's dangerous. You've always run toward the fire. Just make sure he's not the kind that burns everything down. Hermione smiled faintly. If he is, I'll make sure he learns to build something instead. Ginny studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then you'd better be ready to fight for him. I already am. That night, Hermione found Draco in the library, reading by the window. The snow outside had begun to melt. Drops of water ran down the glass like threads of silver. I talked to Ginny, she said, sitting beside him. Should I be worried? She thinks I'm insane. He smiled without looking up. She's probably right. She also said I'd have to fight for you. At that, his eyes flicked to hers. You shouldn't have to fight anymore, Hermione. Not for me. Then why do you keep making me want to? He set down the book, his fingers tracing the spine. Because I've spent my whole life being someone people either feared or despised. And now, there's you, standing in front of me, asking me to believe I could be something else. You can, she said quietly. He looked at her for a long time, then leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. If this ends badly. It won't, she whispered. Not if we keep choosing it. Every day. Every day. The quiet stretched between them, soft and steady, like a promise neither of them had planned, but both already meant. A week later, during breakfast, McGonagall made an announcement that silenced the hall. As part of the ongoing Interhouse initiative, I will be reviewing the temporary placement of Mr. Malfoy after the next Quidditch match. His transfer may be reconsidered. Hermione's heart stopped. She glanced at Draco, but his face was unreadable. When breakfast ended, he caught her arm near the door. Don't look like that, he said. It's not a surprise. They can't send you back. He smiled tightly. They can do whatever they like. Hermione shook her head. No, you've changed. You belong here. Draco's expression softened. I don't belong anywhere, Granger. You know that. Then make them see you do. He studied her, then said quietly, You still think courage can fix everything? No, she said, but it can remind people they were wrong. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he took her hand, quick, subtle, hidden from view, and whispered, Then I'll try to be brave, for you. When he let go, Hermione felt the absence like a wound. She watched him walk away, back straight, the whispers following him through the hall like ghosts. She knew the next days would test them. The coming match, the professor's scrutiny, the rumors. But she also knew something else, something steady and terrifying and true. They'd already crossed the line between caution and love. And no matter how the world judged them, neither of them would go back. Love, Hermione thought, wasn't about being safe. It was about standing in the middle of the storm, hands still clasped, daring it to break first. And for the first time, she realized that was exactly what she and Draco were doing. The news of Draco's possible transfer back to Slytherin spread through the castle faster than any rumor had before. By nightfall, every corridor seemed to hum with speculation. Some said it was punishment. Others said it was only a matter of time before the experiment ended. For Hermione, the thought of losing him, of him being taken from the fragile world they'd built, was unbearable. She had spent months teaching him to see that Gryffindor wasn't a punishment, that he could belong here. Now, all that progress felt as if it could vanish overnight. He didn't talk about it. Whenever she brought it up, he changed the subject or made a joke too sharp to touch. On the night before the Quidditch match, she found him outside the common room, staring into the firelight that spilled through the portrait hole. Do you ever stop pacing? He asked without turning. Do you ever stop pretending you don't care? She replied. He glanced at her, his mouth curving slightly. Touché. Draco, this matters, he sighed. Not to the people making the decision. It matters to me. That silenced him. For a moment, his mask cracked. You really think McGonagall will let me stay after everything? After what my name means? She's not the only one who gets to decide what your name means, Hermione said quietly. You do. He smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. You sound like Dumbledore. Then maybe you should listen. He looked at her, eyes softening just slightly. If I do, I might start believing you. Good, she said, and before she could think better of it, she reached out, brushing his sleeve. Because I need you to. The next morning dawned bright and bitterly cold. The Quidditch pitch gleamed with frost, the stands filling with students wrapped in scarves and blankets. Hermione sat near the front, her hands clenched tight in her lap. When the teams took the field, the roar of the crowd was deafening. Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw, the final match before the review. Draco, still in scarlet, mounted his broom with practiced grace. Hermione's heart hammered. The whistle blew. The game exploded into motion. Bludgers shot across the sky. Cheers and jeers mingled like thunder. Draco flew higher, eyes scanning for the snitch. Every movement was sharp, deliberate, the controlled precision of someone who refused to fail. And then, in a blur of gold, he dove. The crowd gasped. The opposing seeker lunged beside him. Two bludgers arced dangerously close. Hermione rose to her feet as Draco twisted, barely missing impact, the wind tearing through his hair. He stretched out his hand and caught it. The roar was deafening. Gryffindor won. Hermione barely heard the cheers. All she saw was him, flushed, breathless, alive. For once, he wasn't the boy trying to atone for something. He was just Draco, and he was brilliant. When he landed, his teammates surrounded him. Even Ron clapped his shoulder grudgingly. Hermione ran down the stands, meeting him at the edge of the pitch. "You did it," she said, breathless. He grinned, eyes bright. "I suppose I did. Maybe now they'll finally see you for who you are." He tilted his head, still smiling. "And who's that?" "The man who just won Gryffindor the match," she said softly. For a moment it looked like he might kiss her right there, in front of everyone. But he caught himself, the smirk fading into something quieter. "Not yet," he murmured. "Not until it means something." Hermione understood. That evening, McGonagall called him to her office. Hermione waited outside the entire time, pacing the corridor until her legs ached. When the door finally opened, Draco stepped out, face unreadable. "Well?" she demanded. He didn't answer. He just kept walking until they turned the corner and the corridor was empty. Then he stopped, turned to her and said, "I'm staying." Hermione blinked. "You're what?" She said, "I've proven I can belong anywhere I choose to," he said, his voice low, almost disbelieving. "That Gryffindor's taught me something Slytherin never could. Not bravery, but accountability." Hermione's throat tightened. "Draco, that's—" He didn't let her finish. He reached for her hand, pulling her close. "You were right," he said, "about everything." She smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "Say that again. I might frame it." He laughed softly, a sound she wanted to keep forever. "Don't push your luck." Then, before she could breathe, his hands were on her waist and his lips found hers. It wasn't a secret anymore, not something to hide in the shadows. It was real and reckless and alive. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "You realize," Hermione said, "the entire school is going to explode when they find out." "Let them," he said. "For once, I don't care what they think." The days that followed were chaos. Whispers turned to stares, stares to open astonishment. Yet the world didn't end. No one hexed them. McGonagall merely raised an eyebrow and said, "So long as it doesn't affect your grades, Miss Granger." Ron grumbled, but eventually accepted it. Ginny just smirked and said, "About time." Still, not everyone was kind. Draco bore the snide comments with his usual calm, but Hermione could see the toll it took, the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he sometimes paused before entering a room. One evening she found him sitting alone by the fire in the common room, the light flickering across his face. "You don't have to sit here and let them glare at you," she said softly. "I do," he replied. "It's the only way they'll learn." "Learn what?" "That I'm not leaving this time." She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "Neither am I." He turned to her, his expression softening. "You realize this makes you the bravest witch in Hogwarts." "I was already that," she teased. He smiled. "True, but now you're also the most stubborn." She leaned against him, the warmth of the fire mingling with the steady beat of his heart. "Takes one to know one." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and unhurried. The castle seemed to exhale, the storm finally passing. For the first time in months, Draco felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not the false kind that came from silence or solitude, but the quiet certainty of being seen and still accepted. He looked at Hermione, her face illuminated by the glow of the flames, and thought, This is what redemption feels like. Not grand gestures or forgiveness handed down by others. Just this. A chance to begin again, hand in hand, no longer hiding. Hermione felt his gaze and turned to him, smiling. "What?" "Nothing," he said softly. "Just thinking how impossible you are." "Good," she murmured, "because that means you'll never stop trying." He laughed quietly, his fingers finding hers. And as the fire burned low, the last embers glowing deep gold, Draco Malfoy, once the boy who sneered at courage, sat beside the brightest witch of her age, learning that bravery wasn't in grand speeches or noble acts. It was in staying. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. Spring came to Hogwarts in shy, uneven breaths. The snow melted, revealing wet cobblestones and the first shy blades of grass pushing through the soil. With it came a strange sense of renewal, the hum of something mending. But for Hermione and Draco, peace was a fragile thing. Their relationship wasn't secret anymore, yet it felt no less perilous. Every shared glance in the great hall still drew murmurs. Every touch, every accidental brush of fingers was weighed by 100 eyes. Hermione pretended not to notice. Draco never pretended anything. He bore it with his head high, his composure sharp as glass. But Hermione saw the cracks forming underneath, the way he flinched when he heard his surname whispered, the way he lingered in the common room after everyone else had gone, as if waiting for the noise to drown out his thoughts. One evening, she found him there, again, sitting before the fire, staring into it like it might answer him. His hands were clasped, his posture too still. "You missed dinner," she said softly. "Didn't feel like being stared at." She sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "You can't let them win by hiding." He laughed quietly, without humor. "You make it sound so easy." "I never said it was easy," she murmured. "Just worth it." Draco turned to her, eyes pale in the firelight. "You don't understand, Hermione. They'll never forget. Every good thing I do, every day I try, it's always in the shadow of what I was." She met his gaze steadily. "Then you keep trying until your shadow gets tired." He blinked, surprised by her bluntness, then smiled faintly. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I have to, for both of us." The fire crackled between them. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "You should have been in Slytherin," he said after a moment. "You know how to twist words until they sound like salvation." "Maybe I learned it from you." His lips curved. "Impossible." "Is it?" He looked at her for a long time, something tender and dangerous flickering across his face. "Everything about you is impossible," he whispered, "and I'm addicted to it." Before she could answer, he leaned in and kissed her, slow, careful, as if he feared it might be their last. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For staying." Hermione's hand tightened on his. "Always." The next morning brought new tension. A notice appeared on the board in the common room. Students from different houses are to attend the inter-house forum, discussing cooperation after the war. McGonagall's signature gleamed at the bottom. Hermione's eyes lit up. "It's perfect. You'll speak. You'll show them who you've become." Draco looked less enthused. "You want me to stand in front of half the school and deliver a lecture on morality?" "Not morality," she said. "Growth." He arched an eyebrow. "That's worse." She laughed. "I'll help you prepare." "I'd rather face a dragon." "Stop it," she said, grinning. "You'll be brilliant." He muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like "I doubt it," but he didn't refuse. For the next week, they worked together in the library after curfew. Hermione spread parchment and quills across the table. Draco leaned back in his chair, pretending indifference, but absorbing everything. "You should speak about second chances," Hermione said one night. "What they mean?" He raised an eyebrow. "I don't know what they mean." "You do," she said softly. "You live them every day." He met her eyes, the words catching somewhere behind his ribs. "Only because you gave me one." She smiled. "Then tell them that." He shook his head, but there was no resistance in it. "You really want me to bare my soul in front of Potter and Weasley?" "I'll sit in the front row," she teased. "If you freeze, look at me." "Dangerous advice," he murmured. "You make me forget what I'm supposed to say." "Then just tell the truth." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if this goes wrong, it won't." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He didn't pull away. The day of the forum arrived. The great hall was transformed, the long tables replaced with rows of chairs. Banners of every house hung from the ceiling, their colors rippling gently in the breeze. Students filled the room, buzzing with expectation. At the front, McGonagall stood beside a podium. "Today," she announced, "we speak not as houses, but as Hogwarts." Hermione's heart pounded as Draco's name was called. He rose slowly, his face composed but pale. When he stepped forward, the whispers began, a ripple of doubt and curiosity. He reached the podium, hands steadying on the edge. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy. Then he began, voice low but clear. "I didn't want to be here," he said simply. "Not in this room, not in this house, not in this school, because I thought I knew what bravery looked like, and I was wrong." The whispering ceased. "I spent years believing courage was something loud, something performed. But it's not. It's waking up and facing the world you've broken. It's letting people see you fail and trying anyway. It's forgiveness, even when you don't deserve it." He paused, eyes flicking toward Hermione. "I used to think redemption was something you earned," he continued. "But maybe it's something you accept, when someone offers it and you're brave enough to believe them." He stepped back. The silence was complete. Then, slowly, the applause began, hesitant at first, then louder, until the room thundered. Hermione's hands stung from clapping. Pride filled her chest until it hurt. When he returned to his seat, his expression was dazed, as if he didn't quite believe what had happened. Hermione leaned close. "You did it," he exhaled shakily. "I almost fainted halfway through." She laughed under her breath. "You hid it well." "Of course I did," he said, voice softening. "I had something worth looking strong for." That evening, after the forum ended, the castle felt different. The tension that had always clung to Draco's name had loosened just slightly. Students nodded at him now instead of turning away. It wasn't full acceptance, not yet, but it was something. Hermione found him by the lake, the sunset painting the water gold. He didn't turn when she approached. "You were incredible," she said. "Don't start." "I mean it." He smiled faintly. "You always do." They stood in silence, watching the light fade. Then she said, "Do you believe it now, that you belong here?" He looked at her. "I believe it when you're beside me." "Good," she whispered. She took his hand and he let her. The reflection of the sky shimmered on the surface of the lake. red and gold tangled with silver and green. Two colors that were never meant to belong together, yet somehow did. Later that night, as they returned to the common room, Draco stopped her just before the portrait hole. "Granger," he said quietly. "What?" He hesitated. "You changed everything, and if I lose you, I'll forget how to be good again." She reached up, her fingers brushing his jaw. "Then don't lose me." "I won't," he said, the words a promise. Then he kissed her, slow, steady, not desperate this time, but certain. The kind of kiss that said he finally believed in something beyond fear. When they pulled apart, Hermione smiled. "See? I told you. Worth it." Draco smiled back, and for the first time in his life, it reached his eyes. Inside the common room, the fire crackled softly, casting red light over their joined hands. And though the world outside would always remember who they had been, here, in the heart of Hogwarts, they were simply two people learning what love could do. Not erase the past, but write something better over it. The weeks that followed the Interhouse Forum carried a new rhythm. Students began to speak to Draco, cautiously at first, then with something approaching normalcy. The sharp stares softened, whispers turned into nods of acknowledgement. It wasn't forgiveness, not quite, but it was a beginning. Hermione could see the change in him. The walls he had built, those careful, impenetrable layers of pride and self-loathing, were cracking. He smiled more easily now, even if only for her. Sometimes she caught him lingering near a group of younger students, quietly offering help with a charm or transfiguration spell. He still bristled when anyone thanked him, but the effort was there. Yet, for every step forward, the weight of his past followed close behind. It showed in the way he sometimes paused mid-sentence, as if listening for ghosts that never truly left. One evening, after dinner, Hermione found him in the library. The light from the enchanted chandeliers cast soft shadows across his face. He didn't hear her approach until she sat beside him. "Are you hiding?" she asked, "or pretending to study?" He smirked faintly without looking up. "Both. It's efficient." She leaned closer to read the open book, Magical Ethics and Redemption in the Post-War Era. "Interesting choice," she murmured. "Morbid curiosity," he replied. "I wanted to see if they've written my name under hopeless causes." Hermione nudged him with her elbow. "Stop that." "Stop what?" "Acting like you're still on trial." He closed the book, finally meeting her eyes. "Maybe I am. Every day feels like an appeal hearing." She studied him for a long moment. "You're not on trial anymore, Draco. You're living proof that people can change." He looked away. "People forgive heroes, Hermione, not villains." "Then maybe they need to learn how." He laughed softly, that quiet, disbelieving sound that always made her chest ache. "You say things like that and make me want to believe them." "You should," she whispered, "because I do." Spring deepened into warmth. The lake shimmered under sunlight, the air filled with the scent of wet grass and parchment. Exams loomed, but so did something else. A growing awareness that their time at Hogwarts was ending. The thought frightened Hermione more than she expected. One night, after curfew, she and Draco walked the empty corridor near the astronomy tower. Their patrols had long since become excuses for stolen moments away from the rest of the world. "What will you do after this?" she asked quietly. He took a long time to answer. I don't know. There's a lot of talk about rebuilding. Old estates, old reputations. You could work for the ministry, she said. Reform laws, maybe. Draco laughed softly. A Malfoy in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I'd last 5 minutes before someone threw a hex at me. Then find something else. Something that's yours. He looked at her, his voice low. You really think I could? I know you could. He stopped walking, forcing her to turn. What about you? Return to the ministry. Maybe campaign for magical equality again. He smiled faintly. Still saving the world. Someone has to. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that felt like breathing. Easy, necessary. Then Draco said softly, "What if we don't see each other again?" Hermione's chest tightened. "We will. You don't know that. Then we'll make sure of it." He took a step closer, his voice barely a whisper now. "You always sound so certain." "Because I am," she said. "About you." Draco's expression softened, but his eyes were shadowed. "I don't deserve that." "Stop trying to earn it," she whispered. "Just live it." He smiled, small, pained, but real. "You really don't know how to stop saving people, do you?" She hesitated. "Not when they're worth saving." The last Quidditch match of the year came and went, a blur of cheers and colour. When the final score was called, students poured into the courtyard, laughter echoing under the setting sun. Draco and Hermione slipped away from the noise, climbing the path toward the castle gardens. It was their place, quiet, half forgotten, full of wildflowers and late sunlight. "Funny," Draco said, sitting on the old stone bench, "how this place never changes, no matter how much we do." Hermione smiled, sitting beside him. "Maybe that's why I like it." He turned toward her, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "Do you ever think about how impossible this would have sounded a year ago?" "All the time." He smiled faintly. "We used to hate each other." "No," she corrected softly. "We misunderstood each other. There's a difference." "Is that what this is now? Understanding?" She met his gaze, her pulse unsteady. "Something like that." His expression shifted, part wonder, part fear. "Sometimes I still think this will disappear, like I'll wake up and it'll have been a trick of my mind." Hermione reached out, tracing the edge of his sleeve. "It's real, Draco." He swallowed. "Then why does it feel so fragile?" "Because it matters." He was silent for a long time, the breeze moving through his hair. Then, in a voice almost too quiet to hear, he said, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For refusing to hate me when you had every reason to." Hermione smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what courage really is. Loving someone when you're supposed to walk away." His breath caught. "Loving?" She froze, but it was too late to take it back. He leaned closer, eyes searching hers. "You said it before, but I thought—" "I meant it," she whispered. Draco's voice trembled. "And you still do?" "Yes." He didn't speak. He just kissed her, slow and steady, as though time itself had stopped to listen. When they pulled apart, she rested her head against his shoulder. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. "I love you too," he said finally, the words breaking like a spell. Hermione smiled through her tears. "You took your time." He laughed softly, the sound trembling. "Had to be sure it was real." "It is," she said. "It always has been." Later, as they walked back toward the castle, the sky darkened to twilight. The towers glowed against the fading light, familiar and eternal. "Do you ever think," Draco said quietly, "that maybe the sorting hat was wrong?" Hermione smiled. "About what?" "About houses. About us being different kinds of people." She looked at him, eyes soft. "Maybe it was never wrong. Maybe it just knew we'd need to learn from each other." He nodded slowly. "Maybe Gryffindor was never a punishment." "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "It was a second chance." They reached the portrait hole, pausing before it opened. Draco turned to her, his voice low, sincere. "Whatever happens after this, I want you to know. You were the first person who made me want to stay." Hermione smiled, tears bright in her eyes. "And you were the first person who made me believe people could change." He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then I guess we both learned something," he whispered. When the portrait opened and they stepped inside, the warmth of the common room wrapped around them. Laughter, firelight, home. And for the first time, neither of them felt like they were pretending to belong. Outside, the moon rose over Hogwarts, silver and bright. The castle held its breath, as though even its ancient walls knew that some stories didn't end in grand gestures or battles won, but in two people quietly choosing each other over and over until the past no longer defined them. In the flicker of the firelight, Hermione looked at Draco and thought, "This is what redemption looks like." And he, for once, believed it too. The final weeks at Hogwarts unfolded like the slow turning of a page neither of them wanted to end. Exams came and went in a blur of ink and sleepless nights. The castle hummed with the strange energy of endings, students laughing too loudly in corridors, trying to freeze time in their memories, pretending it wasn't all about to change. For Hermione, it wasn't the end of school that scared her. It was what came after. She'd built her life around certainty, plans, schedules, the next goal waiting to be reached. But now, every time she looked at Draco across the library table or felt his hand brush hers during patrol, that certainty wavered. And Draco? He'd grown quieter, not distant, just thoughtful, as though each day was a countdown he couldn't quite stop. He walked the halls differently now, not with defiance or fear, but with the cautious reverence of someone learning to say goodbye to a place that had changed him more than he'd ever admit aloud. One night, long after curfew, Hermione found him standing alone in the astronomy tower. The stars hung bright above the black lake, the air cool and heavy with the scent of summer rain. "You'll get caught," she said softly. "I was waiting for you," he replied without turning. Her chest tightened. "How did you know I'd come?" "You always do," he said, and when he finally faced her, his smile was small but certain. "You can't let anything end without a proper conclusion." "Guilty," she admitted, stepping closer. "You've been quiet lately." "Just thinking." "About what?" He looked past her, toward the horizon. "About leaving. About what happens when we're not here, when we're not safe inside these walls." Hermione's voice softened. "We'll still be us." "That's what I'm afraid of," he said. "That I'll wake up one morning and forget how to be this version of myself, the one you see." "You won't," she said quickly. "You've come too far." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You have too much faith in me." "Maybe," she said, "but that faith is yours to keep now." The wind tugged at her hair, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Draco said quietly, "Do you know what the strangest thing is? I used to think courage was loud, shouting, fighting, proving something. But I think it's this, standing still, letting someone love you even when you don't think you deserve it. Hermione swallowed hard. You do deserve it. He stepped closer, his voice a whisper. Then let me say it back, properly, before we go. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. The world fell away. When he kissed her, it wasn't the kind of kiss that promised forever. It was the kind that said thank you for seeing him, for saving him, for believing. When they parted, the tears in her eyes weren't just from sadness. They were from everything she'd held back for so long. Whatever happens after this, Draco said quietly, you need to promise me something. What? Don't stop being you. Don't stop fighting for the things you believe in, even if I'm not beside you. She shook her head. Don't say that. I have to, he said softly, because the world outside isn't Hogwarts. People won't look at me and see what you see. Then we'll make them. He laughed under his breath. You really believe we can change the world, don't you? Someone has to. And it's always you. She smiled faintly. Maybe this time, it's both of us. The next morning brought sunlight so bright it hurt to look at. The carriages stood waiting to take them to the train. Trunks clattered down the stairs, laughter echoing through the courtyard. Hermione stood by the fountain, clutching her books like armor, watching the tide of students. Draco found her there, his robes neat, his expression unreadable. So, he said lightly, head girl, ready to conquer the world. Only if you're ready to stop running from it. He smiled. I'll try. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say, pleas and promises, but none of them seemed right. The noise around them faded to a distant hum. He stepped closer, tucking a curl behind her ear. I don't know where I'll be yet, he said, but I'll find you. I'll make sure you can. He nodded once, then, almost shyly, took her hand. Thank you, he said again, but the word carried more this time. Gratitude, hope, and the quiet ache of goodbye. Don't thank me, she whispered. Just live like you mean it. He looked at her for a long moment, then leaned in and kissed her, soft, certain, final. And then he turned and walked toward the carriages, the sunlight spilling gold across his hair. Hermione stood watching until he disappeared from view. The train ride back to London was a blur. Ron and Ginny talked beside her. Harry dozed against the window. Hermione sat silently, her gaze fixed on the passing countryside. Somewhere in the distance, another carriage carried Draco away, toward whatever life waited for him beyond the tracks. She didn't cry. Instead, she smiled to herself, a small, secret smile that carried the weight of everything they'd been through. She thought of that night in the common room, of the first time he'd said her name without venom, of snow falling quietly while they learned to forgive each other. The war had taught her what hate could destroy. Draco had taught her what love could rebuild. Years later, when Hermione returned to Hogwarts as a guest lecturer, she paused by the old Gryffindor fireplace. The room was the same, the warm glow of the fire, the hum of young voices. On the mantel sat a plaque of former students who'd served the school with distinction. She smiled when she saw the name beneath hers, Draco Malfoy. He had returned then, kept his promise, rebuilt his name, rewritten his story. As she traced the letters with her fingertips, she heard footsteps behind her. You still check if it's real? His voice said, older now, richer but unmistakably his. Hermione turned, her breath catching. Draco stood there, no longer the boy haunted by his past, but the man who had learned to carry it. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said softly. "McGonagall invited me to speak," he replied. "Something about redemption and house unity. She said it was our specialty." Hermione laughed, blinking away sudden tears. "I suppose it is." For a moment they just looked at each other, the years falling away between them. Then he reached for her hand, his touch still familiar, still steady. "Looks like we finally changed the world," he said quietly. "Not all of it," she replied, "but enough." He smiled, the same smile she remembered from the tower, and the warmth that filled the room wasn't just from the fire. For a long while, they stood there in silence, two people who had once been enemies, now bound by something far greater than the lines drawn between them. Outside, the evening bells rang through the castle, clear, golden, eternal. And as Hermione leaned into him, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his heartbeat, she realized that some stories didn't end at all. They just began again, in quieter ways, under gentler light. Love, she thought, had never been about comfort. It had always been about courage, about reaching for someone even where the world said not to. Draco's fingers tightened around hers, and the world outside faded to nothing but the soft crackle of firelight and the quiet certainty that, this time, they had both finally come home.
We leave Hogwarts under cover of snow, a place where our heroes finally found the most important thing, each other. This story reminds us of a simple truth. Even the coldest winters come to an end, and true courage is not about loud deeds, but about opening our hearts to warmth and a second chance. May this feeling of a comfort and safety reach you as well. Let this day go. Everything is fine. I am thankful to everyone who watched this video. You are very precious audience.